Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Ikhwan Zakir Madan. My student page number is 24530421010, and today I'm going to doing storytelling as a task of advanced speaking. Okay, so my story is Arabi from a class English classic literature made by James Joyce. So let's get into it. Okay. North Richmond Street. Being blind was a quiet street except at the hour when the Christian Brother school set the boys free. An uninhabited house of 2 stories stood at the blind end, detached from its neighbor in a square ground. The other houses of the street, conscious of decent life within them, gazed at one another with brown imperturbable face. The former tenant of our house, a priest, had died in the back drawing room. Air musty from having been long enclosed, hung in all the rooms, and the waste room behind the kitchen was littered with old useless paper. Among these I found a new paper-covered books, the pages of which were curled and damp. The Abbot by Walter Scott, The Devout Communicant, and the Memoirs of Vidocq. I liked the last best, because its leaves were yellow. The wild garden behind the house contained a central apple tree and a few straggling bushes, under one of which I found the late tenant rusty bicycle pump. He had been a very charitable priest. In his will, he had left all his money to institution and the furniture of his house to his sister. When the short days of winter came, dusk fell before we had well eaten our dinners. When we met in the street, houses had grown somber. The space of sky above us was the color of ever-changing violet, and toward it the lamp of the street lifted their feeble lanterns. The cold air stung us, and we played till our body glowed. Our thoughts echo in the silent street. The career of our play brought us through the dark, muddy lanes behind the houses. When we ran countless of the road tribes from the cottage to the back doors of the dark dripping gardens, where odors arose from the ash pit, to the dark odorous stable where coachmen smoothed and combed the horse of shook music from the buckle harness. When we returned to the street, light from the kitchen windows had filled the areas. If my uncle was seen turning the corner, we hid in the shadow until we had seen him safely housed. Or if Mangan's sister came out of the doorstep to call her brother into his tea. We watched her from our shadow peer up and down the street. We waited to see whether she would remain go in, and if she remained, we left our shadow and walked up to Mangan's steps resignedly. She was waiting for us, her figure defined by the light from the half-open door. Her brother always teases her before obeyed, and I stood by the railings looking at her. Her dress swung as she moved her body, and the soft rope of her hair tossed from side to side. Every morning, I lay on the floor in the front parlor watching her door. The blind was pulled down to within an inch of the sash, so that I could not be seen. When she came out on the doorstep, my heart leaped. I ran to the hall, seized my books, and followed her. I kept her brown features always in my eye, and when we came near the point at which our ways diverged, I quickened my pace and passed her. I had never spoken to her, except for a few casual words, and yet her name was like summons to all my foolish blood. Her image accompanied me even in places the most hostile to romance. On Saturday evening, when my aunt went marketing, I had to go to carry some of her parcels. We walked through the flaring streets, jostled by drunken men and bargaining women. Amid the curses of labor, the shrill intent of soap boys who stood on guard by the barrel of pigs' sticks, the nasal chanting of street-side singers who sang a carmel to you about O'Donovan Rosa or a ballad about the troubles in our native land. This noise is comfort in a single sensation of life for me. I imagine that I bore my Calais safely through a throng of foes. Her name was sprang to my lips at the moment in strange prayers and praises which I myself did not understand. My eyes were often full of tears. I could not tell why, and at times a fluid from my heart seemed to pour itself out into my bosom. I told little of the future. I did not know whether I would ever speak to her or not. If I spoke to her, how I could tell her of my confused adoration. But my body was like a harp, and her words and gestures were like finger running upon the wires. One evening, I went into the back drawing room in which the priest had died. It was a dark, rainy evening, and there was no sound in the house. Through one of the broken panes, I heard the rain impinge upon the earth, the fine incessant needle of water playing in the southern beds. Some distant lamp or lighted windows gleamed below me. I was thankful that I could see so little. All my senses seemed to desire to feel themselves and feeling that I was about to slip from them. I pressed the palms of my hands together until they trembled, murmuring, oh love, many times. At last she spoke to me. When she addressed the first word to me, I was so confused that I did not know what to answer. She asked me, was I going to Rabbi? I forgot whether the answer was yes or no. It would be a splendid bazaar, she said. She would love to go. And why can't you? I asked. While she spoke, she turned a silver parcel round and round her waist. She could not go, she said, because there would be a retreat that week in her convent. Her brother and two other boys were fighting for their cups, and I was alone at the railings. She held one of the spikes, bowing her head towards me. The light from the lamp opposite our door caught the white curve of her neck, lit up her hair that rested there and failing, lit up the hand upon the railing. It fell over one side of her dress and caught the white border of petticoat, just visible as she stood at this. It's well for you, she said. If I go, I said, I will bring you something. What innumerable foolish laid waste my waking and sleeping thoughts after that evening. I wished to annihilate the tedious intervening days. I save against the work to school, at night in my bedroom, and by day in the classroom. Her image came between me and the page I strove to read. The syllable of the word Arabi were called to me through the silence, in which my soul luxuriated and cast an instant enchantment over me. I asked for leave to go to the bazaar on Saturday night. My aunt was surprised and hoped it was not for some Freemason affair. I answered a few questions in class. I watched as my master's face passed from amiability to strangeness. He hoped I was not beginning to idle. I could not call my wandering thoughts together. I hardly any patience with the serious work of life which No that stood between me and my desire. Seems to me child's play, ugly, monotonous child's play. On Saturday morning, I reminded my uncle that I wished to go to the bazaar in the evening. He was fussing at the hall stand, looking for the hot brush, and answered me curtly, "Yes, boy, I know." As he was in the hall, I could not go into front of the parlor and lie at the window. I left the house in a bad humor and walked slowly towards the school. The air was pitiless and raw, and already my heart misgave me. When I come home to dinner, my uncle had not been home. Still, I was early. I sat staring at the clock for some time, and when its ticking began to irritate me, I left the room. I mounted the staircase and gained the upper part of the house. The high, cold, empty, gloomy rooms liberated me, and I went from room to room singing. From the front window, I saw my companions playing below in the street. Their cries reached me weakened and indistinct, and leaning my forehead against the cool glass. I looked at the dark house where she lived. I might have stood there for an hour, seeing nothing but a brown-clad figure cast by my imagination, touched secretly by the lamplight at the curved neck, at the hand upon the railings, and the border below the dress. When I come downstairs, I found Mrs. Mercer sitting at the fire. She was an old girlish woman, a pawnbroker widow, who collected used stamps for some pious purpose. I had to enter the gossip of the tea table. The meal was prolonged beyond an hour, and still my uncle did not come. Miss Mercer stood up and to go. She was sorry she could not wait any longer, but it was after 8 o'clock, and she did not like to be out late. As the night air was bad for her, when she had gone, I began to walk up and down the room, clenching my fist, my own sins. "I'm afraid you may put off your bazaar for this night of our Lord." At 9 o'clock, I heard my uncle latch key in the hall door. I heard him talking to himself and heard the hall stand rocking when it has received the weight of his overcoat. I could interpret these signs. When he was midway through his dinner, I asked him to give me the money to go to the bazaar he had forgotten. "The people are in bed after their first step slow," he said. I did not smile. My aunt said to him energetically, "Can't you imagine? Can't you give him the money and let him go? You've kept him late enough as it is." My uncle said he was very sorry he had forgotten. He said he believed in the old saying, "All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy." He asked me where I was going, and when I told him a second time, he asked me did I know the Arab farewell to his tea. When I left my kitchen, he was about to recite an opening lines of a piece to my aunt. I held the florin tightly in my hands, and I strode down Buckingham Street toward the station. The sight of the streets strewn with boyars and glaring with gas recalled to me the purpose of my journey. I took my seat in a third-class carriage of a deserted train. After an intolerable delay, the train moved out to the station slowly. It carried me onward among ruinous houses and over the twinkling river. At Westland Row station, a crowd of people presses to the carriage door. The porters moved them back, saying it was a special train for bazaar. I remained alone in the bare carriage. In a few minutes, the train drew up beside an improvised wooden platform. I passed out on the road and saw by the lights dial of a clock that it was 10 minutes to 10. In front of me was a large building which displayed the magical name. I could not find any sixpenny entrance, fearing that the bazaar would be closed. I passed quickly to a turnstile, handling a ceiling to a weary-looking man. I found myself in a big hall greeted at half height by a gallery. Nearly all the stalls were closed, and the greater part of the hall was in darkness. I recognize a silence like that which pervades a church of the surface. I walk into the center of the bazaar timidly. A few people were gathered around about the stalls which were still open before a curtain over which the words of Saf Santan were written in colored lamps. Two men were counting money on the silver. I listened to the fall of the coins. Remembering the difficulty why I had come, I went over to one of the stalls and examined porcelain vases and flower tea sets. At the door of the stall, a young lady was talking and laughing with two young gentlemen. I remembered their English accent and listened frigidly to their conversation. Oh, I never said such a thing. Oh, but you did. Oh, but I did not. Didn't she say that? Yes, I heard her. Oh, there's a fib. Observing me, the young lady came over and asked me, did I wish to buy anything? The tone of her voice was not encouraging. She seemed to have spoken to me out of sense of duty. I looked humbly at the great jars that stood like an eastern guard at the either side of the dark entrance to the stall and murmured,